I don't even think a film like this could be racist. I mean, how can that possibly be Hi, and welcome to our review of Ghost in the Shell. So this is just our humble opinion on Ghost in the Shell. We're not, you know, your A-lister film reviewers like your Chris Stuckmann type people with almost 1 million subscribers who calls the film an A-. I mean, we're not Chris Stuckmann, but we've got some opinions and I hope that's fine. I hope that's okay for you to have a look at. I don't usually like giving films ratings out of 5 or whatever, but when it comes to blockbusters, I feel like there's only a set amount of things they're supposed to do. They should have characters that are believable, maybe likeable, definitely consistent, a plot that makes basic sense on first inspection. They're not needlessly offensive. They don't go out of their way to offend someone with what they do, and they should have some sort of thought about some things in them that may be offensive. It should be competently made. I just want the film to be relatively well directed, edited, shot, and of course with the visual effects that work. And last but not least, I want to feel something. So they should make you feel, I don't know, happy, they should make you laugh, they should be thrilling in some way. And with those 5 criteria, we're going to look at Ghost in the Shell and see if it manages to be a 5 out of 5, A- type film.
He's really upset you, hasn't he, with his A- rating. He's touched a nerve.
I just wonder what he thinks A+ is. A bit of context as well to start this off. I've seen the original Ghost in the Shell and Ghost in the Shell 2. I've also seen, I can't remember what it's called, the kind of like semi-CGI remake of Ghost in the Shell, the original one. And I've seen Ghost in the Shell standalone complex as well. I haven't read any of the comics, so I don't know, you know, about that part of it, but I feel like I've got a pretty solid idea of Ghost in the Shell. I even played the PlayStation 1 game of it.
And my view is just coming to this fresh as a film, not wanting to do too much research into what it was about. I didn't want that to bias.
As like a single piece,
my opinion.
like a single A-, maybe minor problems masterpiece overall.
Yeah, see if it lives up to that.
So after we saw the movie, we went and made some notes because I think it's fair to say spoilers. The film is quite forgettable.
Yeah, we were worried that we'd have nothing to talk about by the time we got back.
Okay, so number 1, characters.
How 3-dimensional do you think the characters were?
I feel like they're 1-dimensional at best. You know, these are really like. Yeah, these are really, really thin characters. My test for that is I'm like, when I think about a character, what do they do after the events of the film are over? You know, like, how do they chill? Like John McClane at the end of Die Hard, right? I know what he's going to do. The guy, on his days off, he goes and he watches the game, he pounds a couple of beers in a pub, and then goes back and makes out with his wife, right? Like, okay, I know. He's like a man's man, right? He's a guy. I get it. That's cool, it makes sense. What does the Major do when she's chilling?
Sits somewhere, looks emotionless, I think. It's
what she does in the whole film. There's a weird kind of get out you get with sci-fi films where they're like, oh, but we're allowed to write bad characters because it's a robot.
But she's not a robot.
But she's not. And
that's
also,
the whole point.
It's fundamentally unfair because even like actual robot characters like Data in Star Trek,
yeah,
he's a character, right? I know what he does in his time off because they have episodes about it. Yeah, Batu, her mate, he has a life outside of the events of the film. He's like one of the only characters with an actual background. He goes home, he goes fishing, he drinks a beer, he plays with his dogs, right? Like, we know what his life is about. But the rest of the characters are really, really one-dimensional. I think there's 3 exceptions, which is Batu, Takeshi Kitano's character, who I don't even know the name of.
Do they even say the name?
Chief. The Chief, yeah. And then you've got the bad guy, Kusai. Batu, like I said, he has a background, he has like a life outside of the film, which already makes him essentially like the most interesting character in the movie by far.
Yeah.
Takeshi Kitano is wasted in this film. He spends all of his time slouching around, sitting on couches, just being really quiet and boring. And yeah.
Like this for pretty much the whole film. Don't do it, Major.
He's the only character who speaks Japanese, and he speaks Japanese throughout the whole film. But maybe that's just because he couldn't be fucked to speak English in the movie. He was like,
phoning it in.
But Takeshi, we've written it in English. Just give me the gist. Give me the gist and I'll do it myself. But he gets one scene that's fucking awesome, where he just wails on these 3 dudes and then empties a revolver all over their dead bodies and tells them this like sick Bond one-liner, right?
Yeah.
And already in that instance, he's so much more interesting than like anything else.
Every other scene, even if the characters is 1-dimensional, if the plot is good enough, it can kind of carry it. Keanu Reeves in The Matrix or something, which is a fair comparison.
He's a cipher for the plot to take place.
Yes, he's a conduit for the plot, but here it doesn't work because the plot isn't quite as strong, and we'll get onto that in a sec.
You get a risk that basically I would like to call, this is my suggestion, is we call it the Luke Skywalker problem, right? Which is that you end up with a main character who's fundamentally the most boring character in the story you're telling.
Yeah.
And in Luke's case, the second 2 films he's much more interesting in. But in A New Hope, he's fundamentally like, you don't want to see him, you want to see Han Solo, right?
Yep.
And in Ghost in the Shell, we get Batu as our Han Solo.
Yep.
I just want to see a film about him. And in fact, Ghost in the Shell 2 is basically about him. In conclusion to this section of the review, I think that basically the film is full of really boring characters, including, unfortunately, its lead character. I think she's really dull overall.
It's not the actor's fault, I don't think.
Yeah, I always think as an actor, if you're like, I'm going to play an emotionless role, I think that's a really risky thing to do.
The dialogue, there are certain points where you're physically wincing at how bad that the dialogue can get.
What is a soul?
Yeah, and by souls do you mean
shells?
Ghosts.
Shit. There's like 3 or 4 scenes when someone says, so you're a ghost, which is a brain, that then goes in a shell, which is a physical body. It happens before the titles in a text spiel. It happens during a voiceover before the titles, and then it happens again. Juliette Binoche
several times
is like,
throughout the film.
hey, a ghost is this, and the shell is this, right? A lot of the characters just fundamentally spend most of their time as exposition, so it's kind of unfair to think about the actors being the source of the problem there. I think the script, by far, is the biggest problem in the film. Which brings us nicely to our next criteria. Plot.
RoboCop.
It's the plot of RoboCop. It's exactly the plot of RoboCop. Corrupt corporate executive does some unethical stuff to turn someone into a machine, gets rid of all of their memories surrounding that so they don't that they can be easily controlled. They start fighting another person that they've basically told them to go and get. Then it turns out that the corporate executive is really behind it. So they're going against their programming, and with the help of someone else on the inside, they go back to where the actual villain is and kill them. And then that's the end of the film. That's my opinion, Aaron. But your really big hitters, you know, your big, cool YouTube reviewers, your men like Chris Stuckmann, for instance, would say that that was an original and charming thing to do. This is a film that is original, Aaron, and charming. Yes, it might have the plot of RoboCop mixed with the Bourne Identity, with the tone of The Matrix and Blade Runner. But it's original and charming. It's original, Aaron, like the original film that it's based off. A lot of movies were inspired by the original Ghost in the Shell, right? Including
but the new
The
one
Matrix.
doesn't bring anything new to the
It
table.
doesn't at all.
Is the big problem.
Weirdly, what it does is, it's like, okay, so, you know, The Matrix, one of the most iconic science fiction films ever, I think, quite fairly. And also Dark City, which, in my opinion, is sort of better than The Matrix as a film overall. But it certainly didn't have the pop cultural impact, but it's a really good movie, Dark City. It's well worth watching. You know, those movies are really, really great, and they take a huge influence in a lot of ways from Ghost in the Shell, the anime, not the comic or this film, obviously. But what they did was they made a new story, and they told it in a different way, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, it was a reason why it became so iconic. And also, it should be said, they're both fucking fundamentally good films.
Yep.
They're both watchable and interesting and full of characters and plots and stuff like that. Memorable. I'm losing it. I'm just losing the plot of this film.
We need to get on with this
losing
film
names.
review.
By the end, I'll be like, who me am I? It's an attempt to make an original plot, because as far as I can tell, like I said, I haven't seen the comics, but I've seen all the animes and stuff. As far as I can tell, this is an original plot, essentially. For the Ghost in the Shell franchise. There are certain set pieces that are wholesale ripped from the anime, including pretty much the opening fight when she comes through the window, and also the fight on the kind of like shallow water outside the slums. That is exactly in the film, where the Major turns invisible and runs around. Even for like certain shots are kind of repeated. It's kind of hard to call that original, especially when the plot is basically a rip-off of another plot. Chris Stuckmann points out that actually, on the contrary, the film is extremely surprising. And he just did not see that twist coming. He couldn't believe it. Yeah. And Chris Stuckmann has 900,000 subscribers.
He has literally
He's almost 1 million
times
people.
He's 1,000 times more correct in his opinions.
1,000 times more correct.
So you need to
and he says this is, you know, like the second best sort of film that it's possible to be. So fucking, if you're sitting here agreeing with us, sober up, alright? Go to Chris Stuckmann's channel. Stop watching the video.
Yeah, stop watching us.
We're wrong.
We're wrong.
Chris Stuckmann's right.
Ooh.
So she realises that the corporate pen pushers, all those bastards at the top, are the people who are doing it.
She's been told that her life was saved and in some sort of accident.
She's been told the RoboCop origin story, where her life was saved as a sort of accident from a bombing due to terrorists, right?
Except in that case, it is actually true. She's just been a homeless girl that's been kidnapped and
by this evil corporate pen pusher who's pushing this program for reasons that aren't entirely ever made clear. It's not totally clear.
Why don't they just leave like cancer patients or something instead of?
So you're like right, okay. What I really want to do is make like the ultimate weapon. So what I'm gonna do is pick up a load of people who are rootless, these homeless kids. Yep. I'm going to take their brains and I'm going to put them into robots, right? It doesn't work for 98 iterations. She's the 99th time they've tried it, right?
It's not like it's a couple of people going missing. It's a fair number.
100 fucking people.
And you're working with the government and to produce these security forces. So there's some political sensitivity about potentially kidnapping people.
But then you're sitting there and you're thinking, is there not an easier way to accomplish what this guy Cutter is the name of the CEO. Is there not an easier way of accomplishing what he's accomplished? I've got two options, right? One option is that you could just go and find a load of cancer patients, like terminal cancer patients who are
Or just-
dying,
yeah.
and just go like, look, your brains are fine, the rest of your body's fucked. We're going to take your brain,
Yep.
and we'll give you a new life in the body of a machine. Here's another option. Who do you think are people who are really used to keeping secrets, no one really knows what they do or where they go, and who are really well trained and good at being weapons?
And committed to a cause.
Like special forces?
Yep.
Why not just go find a special forces unit and be
There'd
like,
be someone willing.
we'd like to give you a fuckload of money for like your inheritance or whatever, and declare you legally dead and take your brains and put you into Black Ops. They literally do that already anyway, right? With spies. That's how spies work. So it's like the plot doesn't even make basic sense on first assumption, right? Like very little about it really works or makes sense. Or is fun, I think. There's nothing compelling about the plot. And one of the biggest problems is that because they switched those villains, there is no climax to the film. Cutter takes control of a spider tank.
For no reason. There is a man whose job it is to control the spider tank, and he literally goes, I'm going to take control of this. I'm going to do this. And you're like, but you are a CEO of a company. I'm not saying a spider tank is a stupid idea. It might well be a stupid idea.
But it's anime.
But why is the CEO controlling the spider tank?
Yeah.
Instead of the man who has been practicing and controlling the spider tank.
If I'm being charitable, I think it's about someone rediscovering their memory and their emotions, right, as a film. And then at the ending, you don't have an emotional climax. So it's like it just falls flat in like every way conceivable. I like my films to be competently made. I just like them to be well enough shot, well enough designed, well enough directed, and well enough executed with special effects.
It's a fair ask. The actual world building, the idea behind that, there was some nice subtleties to it, and that generally was all right. It wasn't great.
Okay.
It was one of the stronger parts of the film.
Yeah, I think if we're going to give it a star, I think this is the one. They tried really hard with the visual look of the film. I mean, Aran lived in Hong Kong, right?
And a lot of it is filmed in Hong Kong.
It's set in Hong Kong, I think, even though everything's in Japanese and everyone speaks Japanese.
That's very confusing. Yeah.
And there's Yakuza bars instead of triad bars.
Yeah.
And shit like that.
It's weird. I think it's meant to be Japan, but they've just probably could get permits for Hong Kong more easily.
Yeah, well, it's co-produced. I think some of it was shot in Shanghai as well. It's like some of the tenements are. So it has a really strong design. I'm not sure if I call it great, because a lot of the stuff, like for me, if I'm looking at design, it should sort of make sense as well, fundamentally in a film.
Yeah, when you think about a lot of, that's a theme running through this film. It looks nice, but doesn't make sense. There's these huge holographic ads that are the size of skyscrapers, and you kind of think, okay, who's that advertising to? I mean, it's great for the wide shots.
For the camera.
For the wide shots. I mean, it looks fantastic, but actually, if you're looking at an ad and you have to be 200 yards away to actually understand it.
It looks a lot like they just emptied out bits of Hong Kong and didn't even fill them with extras, and then just added loads of holograms in the background.
Yep, and that's especially weird because Hong Kong is an insanely busy city.
It's rammed all the time.
Yeah.
And like I feel like the design is kind of good looking, but even then, it's sort of cribbed from other movies.
It's just good, yeah. It's good.
It's The Matrix and Blade Runner.
You're not like, wow, I've never seen this before.
Yeah, in fact, I'm sitting there thinking, so at best you've managed to make this look like a cartoon from 22 years ago. I mean, but they spent 110 million on making it look like someone else's idea of what the future looked like 20 years ago without updating any of that, really.
And because there's so much CG required throughout, at points that budget is quite clearly stretched thin.
Particularly in the last fight, where there's a lot of like quite dodgy Scarlett Johansson body double stuff
which is difficult to do, granted. Like that's the hardest thing to do with CGI when it's people.
What do you think of the way the film is directed visually, and also like the cinematography? I guess they're kind of hard to tease out.
Again, I think the cinematography was good, but just good. There's some bits where you're like, that is a very pretty shot.
What they had, they shot. But that's fair, right?
But I mean, it's a really interesting city that they're shooting in. It's not particularly hard. Like some of the shots are very beautiful where you're looking up at the buildings, but I mean, you can just lie on your back with the camera and get that shot. It's a really interesting place to shoot. Yeah,
they shot the movie really competently, but ultimately not in a way that's particularly interesting or astonishing, unlike, say, the original film. Ghost in the Shell 2 has a really interesting sequence in it where they standing in the way of a festival, like a spirits festival. And the way that it's done is that those two people are animated.
Yeah.
All the floats in the festival are like CGI, like really, really complex, highly detailed CGI. It took forever to render, apparently. And then everyone else, all the other people, are just like ghosts. They're like shadows.
Yeah.
Like they're on long exposures. That's fascinating. That's
really
a fascinating, interesting visual approach to that scene. and not one that's even common in animation, which is more easy to do more creative stuff in.
And nothing like that is even kind of attempted in
Absolutely
this.
not.
I don't think.
And they do my big bugbear with CGI as well, where they're like, oh, we've got a CGI city, great. We'll do loads of really weird sweeping camera shots that are impossible to achieve in the real world.
And also, they just don't look good because
it just makes it feel fake.
It's clearly CGI.
Yeah, it just makes it feel fake, and you're like, what am I supposed to be impressed about here? Here's you sitting here with just 1,299 subscribers, and you've got someone like Chris Stuckmann, right? Chris Stuckmann, who's like a voice and a light in our community, and he says this is the most visually distinctive and the most like visually faithful version of this film that ever been made.
It's faithful in the sense that it doesn't try anything new.
As Chris Stuckmann would say, that's an A-.
It's faithful to execution, maybe not spirit.
It's like it's faithful to kind of what the actual finished Ghost in the Shell looks like.
Yeah.
But not to like the innovation and approach that they took creatively to it.
Not to the ghost of the original.
Sorry if it seems like a bit of a long video. We're just trying to hit the 10-minute mark so we can properly monetize this.
Yeah.
So.
Put those mid-ads in.
We've left the racism chat until the end to get those racism clicks, those outrage clicks of all those alt-righters.
Don't tell them yet.
Oh shit!
Oh, now they're gonna tune out.
Oh no, fuck. So, did the film make us feel something? Did you feel anything during this movie?
That's the biggest problem. Emotionally, the film I think falls pretty flat. You don't really care about the main character because she is the least interesting.
I would never write a character. I'm like, this character is emotionless, because I think that's like already extremely a high hill to climb. And arguably the biggest problem with the 1995 Ghost in the Shell is the Major is still not that interesting a character. She's like Neo, a sort of cipher for the film to take place. They do a lot of cliched stuff that doesn't land in any way, so they're constantly talking about her as if she's some kind of crazy maverick who just doesn't play by the rules. And all that amounts to is she's like, can I have permission to do this? And they're like, no. And she's like, I did it anyway and it worked out perfectly. And they're like, oh, that was bad of you.
But it's literally like as consequential as that. There's no grievance. It's just like, oh, you shouldn't have done that.
We're
gonna have a meeting now about this.
There's a scene when Cutter is talking to Takeshi Kitano's character, who's the chief, and he's like, you gotta rein her in because she's a maverick and she's out of line. And it cuts to Takeshi Kitano being like,
I don't give a fuck.
It's almost like he hasn't been told what to do in the scene. It's not like a quiet silence like in Drive where they're like, it's like everyone's thinking and calculating about power in the room. He's just sitting there going like, I'm just a warm body for you to say these words to. Like, I don't have to do anything in this film.
I'm being paid.
It feels like a lot of the film feels like it was added in by executives who felt the film didn't have enough feeling in it.
Yeah.
Juliette Brioche is like, just to let you know, I'm going to explain the whole plot and all of the nomenclature right now in the first 3 minutes, really, really distinctly to you. That feels distinctly like it is a note from an executive who was texting throughout the whole film. Like he was sitting there being like, I don't understand what you meant by that. Could you just add in a scene where they say what a ghost is? Because I've sat for the whole movie and I see a lot of shells, sure, but I don't see no ghosts. See? No, this is cinema, see?
Yeah.
I feel like
this makes sense now. Yeah.
There's a really weirdly tech-phobic kind of attitude within the film, which is bizarre because the whole original movie is like very pro-transhumanism in like a really strong way. So you're watching the film being like, again, it feels like an executive being like, you know what would make this fresh and interesting to audiences? My kids text too much. Write something about how bad texting is. Have you heard about social media?
Yeah. It needs to take it from the angle that the kids, there's too much on their phones.
Yeah. No. Those damn kids and their mobile phones. But again, everyone keeps being like, oh yeah, we don't know how these implants are going to work, how they're going to work out.
And that's the plot point. Like, someone gets physically hijacked.
Yeah, but by like a superpowered dude. Like, yeah. It's literally like, even then, they don't then talk about the consequences of that. It's not like everyone starts ripping out their implants. They just carry on. So it's like, what's the point of trying to pretend like there's a theme to the film when there isn't? And especially when Ghost in the Shell, the original anime, had so many themes. It's such a philosophical film that looks at stuff like personal identity and even faith and stuff like that.
It feels like this just kind of mentions them out of credence to that, rather than actually exploring them.
Absolutely.
Fully.
And to be fair, Aran, I think that's where Chris Stuckmann and I see eye to eye. Because as he says, it's not like it's the most philosophical take on the film.
It's dumbed down.
It's just a little bit.
It's quite dumbed down.
Oh, it's a dumb fucking movie, basically. Last but not least, racism. Racism obviously is one of the things that might be a needlessly offensive part of a blockbuster film. And this is something I like to talk about because I feel like a lot of the time blockbusters get a free pass just because they're supposed to be boring entertainment we sit down to watch, like popcorn stuff. And I feel like that allows really nasty political messages to come into our everyday discourse, and I think it's a good thing. There's been a lot of controversy around the race aspects of this film because Scarlett Johansson obviously is white, if you haven't noticed, and she's cast in the place of a character who could have been a Japanese actor.
There's an argument around whether...
There's debate around whether or not the intent was ever really to have her be a Japanese character. In the anime, it's not clear at all. I haven't read the comic, like I said.
The focus should be on her humanity, and race should be irrelevant. And ironically, by perhaps casting her as a white person in what would probably seem to be the role of a Japanese actress, it has taken away from that. That said, fixing that would not make any difference to how good the film was.
There are lots of really good Japanese actors who this film could have been a launching pad for, fundamentally. Yep. Like, case in point, Rinko Kikuchi, previously seen in Kimiko the Treasure Hunter. Really good actor, looks a lot like Major, would have been a great casting choice.
Yep.
Would it have allowed the movie to get funded to the same level?
No, pretty would never.
Not really. This movie's sort of like flopping a little bit, but not really. I mean, it'll make back its money on DVD and stuff like that. Having a Japanese actor in the lead would not have made this a good film.
No.
Like in any way.
It would have made the plot make slightly more sense because we do find out, spoiler again.
We find out that the Major's brain comes from a Japanese woman because we meet her mum who's Japanese. So if they cast a Japanese actor in the role, it would have made slightly more sense at the end when we see her like embracing her mum.
Which is kind of a bit laughable.
The problem fundamentally isn't that Scarlett Johansson is white. The problem is the film's shit. And it wouldn't have been good if she was Japanese, fundamentally. That scene, where there's a white woman embracing a Japanese woman who's her mum, if you'd been a good director, you could have made that into something.
Yeah.
I think like the whole film kind of looks at uncanniness in reality. Yeah. That could have been a really interesting point.
If they'd explicitly gone into that,
they could have been like, "Oh my god, this is so weird! Like my daughter's in a white body." Like they could have really pushed that. That could have been a really weird, kind of unsettling thing. I think there's some structural racism behind the casting.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like there's a structural thing. I'm not saying anyone was like, "Oh, I hate the Japanese. Let's not have any Japanese people in this movie." It doesn't seem realistic to me. But I think there was some structural racism where they were like, "Japanese isn't as bankable" or something like that, and that could have come from any side of it. But it would not have.
Yeah, we wouldn't have been able to get the funding for the film with this actor that we haven't heard of when. Oh, look, Scarlett Johansson. Oh, she's in scantily clad skin suits. Yeah, of course, loads of people want to see that. I'll fund that film.
The casting of a white woman in a role that arguably should have been Japanese is a symptom of the fact that no one in the film fucking cares what it's about.
Yeah.
And it was just made for cash, and they had no idea what they're doing.
And ironically, it won't do as well because of it. What is different now after seeing that film in the way I view the world? Not every film has to do that, but it's nice if it does.
Indiana Jones is a really good example because, Indiana Jones movies are dumb. Fucking fundamentally, they're dumb movies. Yeah. They're pastiches as well. They're not that original. They're quite derivative in lots of ways. But you know Indiana Jones. You could talk about someone in a situation and be like, he was the Indiana Jones of backgammon or something like that. And it makes sense. People understand Indiana Jones. You took something away from the movie. No one's going to take anything away from this. Look, as a certified cuck, I genuinely think the racism is not a problem in this film. And the real issue is the film is fucking fundamentally without any kind of care or attention.
Because it's still problematic, but I mean it wouldn't have changed.
But Aaron, I don't know. To me, that sounds like someone who has sub 10,000 subscribers talking.
Maybe.
And you know who we should really be listening to about this? You know who's the real authority on Ghost in the Shell? It's your man Chris Stuckmann. Big link for Chris. Shout out. He needs more subs. Needs more subs. Real good dude. Real good.
I didn't know that.
Talk about problematic and stuff like that. I think that sounds to me like cuck SJW virtue signalling. And I think that there's no problem with this film at all, except maybe a minor one. Maybe it wasn't quite as philosophical as it could have been. So for Chris Stuckmann, it's going to be an A-. For us here, I think it's like a 1 out of 5. That's unfair. Probably a 2 out of 5. It's a 2 out of 5 fundamentally. Yeah. Here's my invitation to you: don't go see Ghost in the Shell. Go and watch it on DVD.
Yeah.
The anime, not this fucking piece of shit. And maybe take a hit for every shitty remake out there. Go and watch the original RoboCop and the original Total Recall for good measure as well, because they both have shitty remakes that feel very similar to this. I'm going to put some affiliate links down in the description for Amazon, Blu-rays probably for Ghost in the Shell and all the other animes. You don't have to buy them. I think you'd probably be a schmuck if you did, but it really helps the channel out. And if you're going to buy them anyway, you may as well buy them through an affiliate link for us that gives us a certain amount of the money.
Keeps us in cinema tickets.
It keeps us in cinema tickets. It allowed me to buy a Blu-ray reader that'll reading better video essays. It's boring. That's it from us. Hope you
Yeah.
enjoyed the review. Please, if you think I'm some kind of cuck, notify me in the comments down below. But if you're not some kind of like reality-hating, alt-right, phrenologist-loving fuckboy, then let me know in the comments down below what you thought about the movie for reals.
And yeah, if you have any suggestions of movies that you think we should also review, then that would be good to know as well.
Smash that like button. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the bell. You know what? You don't have to click the bell.
Don't click the bell.
I fucking hate that shit.
That's so annoying. Why would you want an email every time someone uploads a video?
I add videos to my watch later list and I get a notification for that and I fucking hate that. And that's stuff I
Turn that
literally chose to watch.
Turn that off.